A young man asked an old rich man how he made his money. And the old guy fingered his worsted wool vest and said, "Well, son, it was 1932, the depth of the Great Depression. I was down to my last nickel. I invested that nickel in an apple. And I spent the entire day polishing that apple. At the end of the day, I sold that apple for 10 cents. The next morning, I invested those 10 cents in 2 apples. And I spent the entire day polishing them and sold them at 5 p.m. for 20 cents. I continued this system for a month, and by the end of which I had accumulated a fortune of $1.37. "And that's how you built an empire?" the boy asked. "Heavens no," the man replied. "Then my wife's father died and he left us $2 million. That always helps. That's the way you do it. Today we return to our sermon series called Losing It. But we're going to be shifting our area of discussion. Over the last 2 weeks, we've examined the idea of eternal security to help us get a better understanding of the term once saved, always saved. That's the focus of this series, understanding that. And this week, I had intended to jump right into the opposing view, which I call the endurance position. To make that transition, however, between what we've been discussing and the new material, I decided there was some context and some history that I really wanted you to know to help introduce this other position. And that introductory material kept getting longer and longer until eventually I realized it was a whole message all by itself. So, today we will be setting the stage for the next 2 weeks and discussing that other position. Now, I actually start us off with the eternal security side of things because it will help put us in the correct frame of mind to approach the scriptures we will be reading for the opposing side. And to understand what I mean, let me take you back to how this concept would have been viewed by the people Jesus was teaching during his earthly ministry. The Jewish people lived for the covenants of God, the promises of God. Back in Genesis 12, we see God's covenant that he was making with Abraham. Line 1, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in all of the families of the earth, in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Abraham's descendants would be a great nation and would be blessed. And then as we move down through those descendants, we come to the Exodus story, which we recently spoke about for our Easter series. And in Exodus 19, we read another covenant that God made with the people, starting at line 3. "While Moses went up to God, the Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the people of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel." Not only are they a great nation, but they will be God's treasured nation. They will be a nation, a holy nation of priests. And now we move forward even more to the covenant that God made with David. 2 Samuel 7, starting at line 12. When your days are fulfilled and you lie down with your fathers, I will raise up your offspring after you, who shall come from your body, and I will establish his kingdom. He shall build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. When he commits iniquity, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with the stripes of the sons of men. But my steadfast love will not depart from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I put away from before you. And your house and your kingdom shall be made sure forever before me. Your throne shall be established forever. Now here's why I want to bring up these covenants. The Jewish people fully expected God to come through on all these promises that he had made. And these promises were not just for this person and that person or that guy over there. These promises were for the nation of Israel. They would be a great nation, a holy nation, a kingdom of priests, a kingdom over which a son of David would rule forever. The promises were for the nation. When the Messiah came, he would not come only for this person or that person, but the whole nation of Israel, to lead the nation against their enemies, establish the Messianic era, the kingdom of God. Christians often have this misconception that Jews followed the law in order to be saved. We scoff at the outdated Jewish ideas that one can earn their way to righteousness by works of the law. But we don't take the time to realize that salvation was an entirely different concept for them, a different mindset. The Christian questions if their salvation is dependent on faith or works, or if salvation can be lost or not. The Jew doesn't worry about salvation at all. Why worry about salvation? They have a promise from God that they will be saved as a nation. There's no reason to worry about it. Now, it's possible that they will go through times of punishment if they forget to do what God has told them. We read this in Deuteronomy 28, line 15. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all of his commandments and his statutes that I command you today, then all these curses shall come upon you and overtake you. And that line is followed by a very long section of curses that will befall them. I was going to include it, but it's just huge. It's really awful. So I didn't. But there's lots of curses. And then in Deuteronomy 30, starting at line 1, we read, and when all these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind among all the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and return to the Lord your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I commanded you today with all your heart and with all your soul, then the Lord your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you, and he will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. So God tells the Jewish people, if you stop doing my will, bad stuff is going to happen to you. But if you come back to me, I will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you. And as we have read through the Old Testament, we know that this exact situation happened over and over and over again. They followed God, they fell away, they were conquered by enemies, they repented, God takes them back. Rinse, repeat, that's how it goes. But these blessings and curses, they were not for individuals. They were for the nation. They were for the people as a whole. The nation would be blessed and prosper. The nation would be cursed and conquered by enemies. Until one day, the nation would be ruled by a son of David who would crush all of God's enemies and be established forever. Though they may go through good times and bad times, the salvation of Israel, the nation of Israel, is assured. Now let us return to what we've been discussing over the last couple of days. This position of eternal security. This position that says, once you have accepted Jesus as your Savior, you never have to worry about salvation again. This is a very similar idea to how the Jews viewed salvation. Biggest difference being that, as we discussed, the eternal security position has the weakness that you can never be sure if you're really, truly a believer in Jesus or if you only think you are. Jews don't have that problem, right? They're born Jews. They're born into the promise of salvation because they are children of Abraham. They have nothing to worry about. Salvation is assured. Even Christians sometimes lean on this Jewish concept of salvation. Kids grow up in families where the parents are Christians, and they may get this idea that they're Christians because their parents are Christians. Like it's something that can be inherited. And that's not the case. We know that's not the case. You can't inherit that. But for the Jews who are awaiting the Messiah, awaiting God's kingdom to come, this is exactly the mindset they had because they did inherit it. They were born into it. But then one day, some wild-looking guy out in the wilderness ruined everything. Matthew 3, starting at line 4. Now John wore a garment of camel's hair and a leather belt around his waist, and his food was locusts and wild honey. Then Jerusalem and all Judea and all the region about the Jordan were going out to him, and they were baptized by him in the river Jordan, confessing their sins. But when he saw many of the Pharisees and Sadducees coming to his baptism, he said to them, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bear fruit in keeping with repentance, and do not presume to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our father.' For I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children for Abraham. Even now the axe is laid to the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire." So we're not even to Jesus yet. We're just at John. We're not even to Jesus, and already the people are being told that salvation is not going to work the way they think it is. This idea that you will be all set because you're related to Abraham, that's done. Something more is going to be required of you when the Messiah comes. A lawyer was reading out a will of a rich man to the people mentioned in the will. And it said, "To you, my loving wife, Rose, who stood by me in rough times as well as good, I leave her the house and $2 million. The lawyer continued, "To my daughter Jessica, who looked after me in sickness and kept the business going, I leave her the yacht, the business, and $1 million. These are things we don't have to put in our will, right? We forgot to put the yacht in our will. No. The lawyer concluded, "And to my cousin Dan, who hated me, argued with me, and thought that I would never mention him in my will, well, you're wrong. To you I leave this. Hi, Dan." Just because you're part of the family doesn't mean you'll get an inheritance. This revelation was a pretty big shock to the Jews. And it was one that didn't really start to sink in until after Jesus had ascended. And all of a sudden the Gentiles started coming in. This means that the membership into the family of God is fluid. Some who were not originally God's people are starting to come in, and those who have always been God's people are getting left out. So, what does this mean when we compare it to the ideas of eternal security that we've been speaking about over the last couple of weeks? And we see this idea addressed in Romans 11, starting at line 16. And we're actually going to spend a little bit of time here. "If the dough offered as first fruits is holy, so is the whole lump. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember it is not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast through faith. So do not become proud, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note then the kindness and severity of God. Severity towards those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in, for God has the power to graft them in again. For if you were cut from what is by nature a wild olive tree, and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these, the natural branches, be grafted back into their own olive tree? Now I want to take that apart a little bit, and I'm going to discuss some of the lines in a different order. So lines 19 and 20. Then you will say, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. That is true. They were broken off because of their unbelief, but you stand fast through faith, so do not become proud, but fear. The branches that were broken off were the ones that had grown there naturally. They're part of the tree. These were the Jews. They felt secure in their lineage, knowing that they were part of the tree that would give them life. And they didn't have to do anything to get there. They just grew there. They're part of the tree. They've always been there. And yet, that security failed them. They were broken off because they did not believe in the Messiah. And the Gentiles, through their faith in the Messiah, were grafted in where those got broken off. They graft them in. And we spoke about these things recently, how some in Israel had been hardened in order to allow the Gentiles to enter into salvation, to be adopted into the family. They were hardened for our sake so that we could come in. Okay, lines 17 and 18. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you, although a wild olive shoot, were grafted in among the others, and now share in the nourishing root of the olive tree, do not be arrogant toward the branches. If you are, remember, it's not you who support the root, but the root that supports you. We get to be part of the family. We get to be part of the family now. We get to be part of the plan for salvation. But will we have the same pride that the Jews fell into, believing that because we've been adopted into the family that we're secure now? We're set. It is not uncommon for Christians to look down on the Jews or have disdain for Jews and their culture because our gain was their loss. They missed out. Yet remember that you did not adopt yourself into the family. You were adopted by God into the family. You have no reason for pride, nor a reason to be arrogant toward the natural branches. Line 21 and 22. For if God did not spare the natural branches, neither will he spare you. Note then the kindness and the severity of God. Severity towards those who have fallen, but God's kindness to you, provided you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you too will be cut off. And now you see we've officially made our transition from eternal security to endurance. We've made that transition. If God will cut off the natural heirs to his promise, how much easier would it be for him to cut off those who are only adopted? In this, Paul dispels the idea that either Jews or Gentiles can sit back and say, I'm part of the family now. I'm all set. Nothing to worry about. For you will receive God's kindness only as long as you continue in his kindness. But what does that mean? to continue in his kindness. It's kind of a weird phrase. And that's what we're going to hope to discover as we really dive into the endurance position over the next 2 weeks. Now, before I let you go, there's one more line from that verse about branches that I'd like to leave you with. It's line 23. And even they, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. For God has the power to graft them in again. So I don't know how you all really feel about this topic, this eternal security, once saved, always saved topic. And I don't know if our discussion about losing one's salvation will make you feel irritated or edgy or worried or perfectly fine. But remember, even though the full passage I read about branches speaks about God's severity to those who have fallen, and we're going to be discussing the idea that people can and will fall away from God, see also that those who do not continue in their unbelief will be grafted back in. Now, this line is speaking specifically about the Jews, about how easy it will be for God to accept the Jews back. But just as his promise and calling have been extended to us, so his mercy extends to us as well. So remember that even while we speak of the possibility of losing salvation, there is nothing that can be lost that God cannot restore. Amen.